Materialism is something that affects a lot of people, and the best way to describe a materialistic person is someone who places a high value on money and possessions to the point where it really becomes the most important thing in their life. And what's interesting is that you don't really have to have a lot of money to be materialistic. There are people without much who place a high value on possessions, and people with much who could care less about stuff. But while this way of thinking might not seem like a big deal, it does have consequences. And for a lot of people, materialism can lead to consumer debt and living above their means. So in today's video, we're going to look at a few simple tips to help you overcome and avoid materialism. So the first tip is to separate your identity from the things that you own. Some people are never satisfied and they're constantly striving for more because they start to see their money and their possessions as an extension of themselves, and they also use these items as a measure of success. It isn't enough for these people to feel accomplished and successful from the inside out. Instead, they need physical, tangible items. The problem, though, is that they're rarely ever satisfied with what they have. They might constantly seek new things or become envious of those who have more, which becomes a never-ending cycle that can lead to unhappiness. So it's so important to separate your identity and to remind yourself that you are not your possessions. If necessary, repeat this to yourself on a daily basis, because when it's all said and done, do you really only want to be remembered as someone who drove expensive cars or wore expensive clothes, or would you rather be remembered for your positive inner qualities? So the second tip is to learn how to value experiences over possessions. I think one of the best ways to overcome materialism is really to remind yourself that it's experiences that can truly make your life richer. And I know some people might not agree with that, but that is something that I believe in my soul. Because when you look back on your life as you get older, you probably won't remember a lot of the stuff you purchased over the years. But I'm willing to bet you'll remember many of the adventures, the fun, and the other good times you had with those you cared about, even if they weren't elaborate or expensive. The reality is, material things only provide fleeting happiness. So if you buy something, yeah, you might get a hit of dopamine and feel instantly better, but the feeling, it doesn't last. So the third tip is to find what makes you happy. It is so important to remember that some people will use materialism to fill a void. So another good way to overcome it is to do some self-reflection and try and figure out why possessions are so important to you and kind of determine what you're compensating for. Maybe you want to make up for what you didn't have as a child. Were you bullied at some point for having less than others? Or are you insecure and need stuff to feel special? Whatever it is, try and get to the root and then find ways to cope with these emotions. Happiness isn't tangible, so you can't buy it. And the truth is, sometimes materialism is nothing more than a distraction from something bigger. One thing that might help is to make a list of everything that brings you joy, keeping in mind that it doesn't have to be anything super fancy. Maybe think back and reflect on what you found enjoyable in childhood or maybe during your early adult years. It could be hobbies, activities, fitness, and for a few weeks or maybe a month, agree to not purchase anything outside of your needs, but instead focus on the things you enjoy. And the reason this works is because when you engage in activities that bring you enjoyment, you start to feel happier. And if so, possessions might become less important. Another tip is to watch your company. It is so important to remember that the people you surround yourself with, they can either influence you for good or for bad. So if you are constantly with materialistic people, their thinking and attitude could rub off on you, especially if you have a tendency to lean in that direction. So if the company you keep makes it hard to overcome this problem, you might have to start limiting contact with certain people, or you might have to just step in and change the conversation whenever it starts to focus too much on money and possessions. And this doesn't only apply to people you see face to face on a regular basis. Social media can also be a bad influence. Friends and relatives might flaunt their stuff online, and if their content feeds your urge, you have to unfriend them or hide their posts. And another thing to keep in mind is that you also have to be careful with certain influencers because sometimes their content can be a trigger. And if so, you might need to take a break. The final tip is to understand how consumerism works. Even though it might be good for the economy because it encourages the purchase of goods and it drives growth, it can also be bad for your pocket. There's always going to be something newer and better or some latest trend. And with that can come the idea that you have to keep up, which can force you into debt and result in saving earning less money. So ultimately, you pay the price if you don't know how to control yourself. And again, there's nothing wrong with satisfying our wants or having nice things, but you do want to avoid this trap of seeking happiness in all the wrong places, because that can end up jeopardizing your finances long term. So that's all that I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, definitely consider subscribing. Here we talk a lot about personal finance. So if you like videos like this, I do post every weekend and sometimes during the week. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in a few days.